here with a video for a blog named Hero. I'm going to be showing you how I made this card for our Christmas event. So I'm using this Peace Poinsettias stamp set from Hero Arts and this Very Merry Christmas sentiment set. Also from Hero Arts, and this stencil, which is the, I think it's called Leaf and Flourish stencil. And I'm going to use this stencil to create a background. I'm going to start with a piece of white cardstock. These are pre-cut and scored cards from Simon Says Stamp. And they're just standard, well, American standard card size, which is 5.5 inches by 4.25 inches. I'm going to be using this Wendy Vecchi embossing paste, and I'm just going to trowel this on to the stencil. I'm lazy, so I didn't tape down the stencil, but if you're careful you can do it without taping it down. It won't move very much. And just spreading this around. I'm not going all the way to the edges of the card. I wanted it to sort of have a bit of a looser feel, not perfect, so I just went mostly to the edges, and I just wiped off those tiny little bits off the edge with my fingers. And I set that aside to dry. And now I've got some just scrap pieces of cardstock, and I'm going to be stamping on this with Versamark. Now recently I just bought a new Versamark stamp pad. Can you tell which one's the new one? Yeah, how embarrassing. But I'm going to be using the old one today because I'm going to be white embossing over the top of this Versamark ink. So when you emboss with an opaque embossing powder like this white embossing powder, it doesn't really matter if your Versamark ink is a little bit grey, because you're not going to see it anyway. I'll keep the new Versamark ink pad for when I'm going to be stamping in Versamark and then maybe clear embossing on white cardstock, something like that, where it does matter what colour it comes out. Now these cardstocks that I'm using are from Stampin' Up. The one on the left is Real Red, and the one on the right is, I think it's Wild Wasabi. And I'm just sprinkling on some Hero Arts white embossing powder. Now I didn't use my EK Success powder tool, so I've got some embossing powder where I didn't want it. So I'm just using a little dry paintbrush to brush away the tiny bits. I'm not brushing it all away because I'm going to be fussing cutting this anyway. So some of the stray bits that are outside of the flower, outside of the poinsettia, I'm just leaving them. Okay, so once I've done that, I've pulled out my Faber-Castell watercolour pencils. I'm not going to be using them as watercolour pencils, I'm just using them as coloured pencils. And I'm pulling out a dark green, a dark brown, a white, and a darkish yellow. I'm just going to be using these to add some detail to the poinsettias. So what I'm doing here, I'm just lining up my stamped images with the dark image, the coloured in image on the stamp set, because I want to figure out which ones I'm going to make the green leaves and which ones I'm going to make the red leaves. Of course, they're not actually leaves in a poinsettia, they're bracts, but hey, I'm a scientist. I have to know these things. So I'm just putting crosses on the ones that I don't need to colour in, because I don't want to waste my time. So with the green ones, I'm just going to draw in some veins on these green petals, and just adds a little bit of shading towards the middle of the poinsettia on each of those leaves. And then I'm going to do the same with the red, but instead of using a red pencil, I'm using a brown pencil, because you can get nice shading on red using a brown colour. So doing the same thing all the way around. And once I've done that, I'm just going to use the white pencil just to add some shading towards the middle of each of those petals to make them look a little bit more three-dimensional, make it look like they're sort of sitting up and the light's shining off them in the middle. I'm just going to add a little bit of yellow to the middle of this red one because that's going to be the top image. And now I'm going to start fussy cutting. Now, I don't really have fun fussy cutting, and I do have the dies for this image from the Hero Art set, but the die leaves a little bit of a border, and I didn't want a little bit of a border. I wanted the edge to be right on that white line. So fussy cutting it is. Now with the green one, I only have to be careful around those green ones that I've coloured in. All the rest I can just chop them off. So that's what I'm doing. And it looks really odd when you see the final fussy cut image, but there is method in my madness, just watch. Because I'm just going to layer them on top of each other. So the red one I've cut out the green leaves, the green one I've just cut out all the red ones, and they fit together like magic. So there you go. I'm going to be using some liquid adhesive to stick these together. Here I'm just cutting off, I found a little bit that I hadn't cut close enough to that white line for my liking, so I just went in again with my scissors. Now I'm going to use some Tombow Mono Multi Glue to stick these two pieces together. I suppose I could have used some dimensional adhesive, but I didn't want to. I also could have made 3 layers to make the petals in the poinsettia in the centre pop up further, but again, I didn't want to, so hey. Now I'm just going to set that aside and come to the third part of the card, which is the sentiment, and I'm putting this onto some vellum stamped in VersaFine Onyx Black. Now this is a pigment ink, which means you can emboss with it. Now I actually have black embossing powder. I have not even a love-hate relationship with black embossing powder. It's a hate-hate relationship with black embossing powder. So if ever I want something that's embossed in black, I just stamp it in VersaFine Onyx Black and clear emboss it. And that makes me much happier because black embossing powder, yeah, it just gets everywhere and it's horrible. So yeah, I don't use it. Alright, so now I'm just brushing away a few little bits while I'm holding my heat gun. I'm heating up my heat gun as I'm doing this, because when you're embossing on vellum, you want your heat gun to be really hot. You don't want your heat gun to be on the vellum for a very long period of time. So the hotter it is when you first take it to the embossing powder, the better, so you don't melt your vellum. Now when I cut this down, and when I went to cut it down, I realised I've stamped it crooked. I always stamp crooked. It's just what I do. But I'm really looking forward to, because my brother and my sister have bought me a very special gift for Christmas. Can you say Misty? So I'm really looking forward to it arriving on Christmas. And I'll hopefully avoid all this stamping crooked stuff. So my embossing texture paste is pretty much dry now, so I'm going to be using some multi-medium matte from Ranger to adhere this vellum panel. So I'm just putting this just behind the sentiment and a big smushy bit over on the left hand side, which is going to be underneath the poinsettia. I'm just going to stick that down, and I'm going to hold it down for a little while using some of my acrylic blocks, which still have my stamps on it. I'm going to rip those stamps off and put them away. And while that's still sitting there adhering, I'm going to be using some Stampin' Up! Stampin' Dimensionals, which is my favourite dimensional adhesive to use, and put them all over the back of the poinsettia. Just going to chop off these excess little bits of vellum off the sides and adhere down the poinsettia, and then I'm pretty much done. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you continue coming back to A Blog Named Hero for the next week or so. We've got a whole lot of Christmassy inspiration for you, and lots of very special visitors very, very special guests. So again, thanks for watching. Hope to see you next time. Bye.